First given the 600 region, I'm going to hit him with d4. Opponent is 600 and he's playing knight to f6. Now, after knight to f6, instead of playing immediate bishop to f4, which is the London system, I'm actually going to play knight c3. And this is the Jobava London system. And the whole idea is to meet g6 with e4. So after knight f6, black needed to play d5. Now I play e4 and I have two very strong pawns in the center of the board. He plays pawn to d6, and he's basically just trying to prevent e5, but we're still going to be developing with the same Joe Bava idea. We want to play queen to d2 and castle. However, if the opponent plays bishop to g7, there is a trap here. And again, I'm just going to tell you the trap. It may not happen, so that way you can research it. If bishop g7, I'll play e5, and after takes, if they trade the queen, my rook takes. And then after that, my knight goes to b5 followed by c7. Did not happen though, because the opponent played bishop to g4. Now, bishop to g4 develops the bishop and attack my queen. Offense is obviously the best defense, so I'm actually going to play the move pawn to f3, hitting the bishop. It does take away the f3 square from my knight, but usually in these lines, the plan is to go qd to castle and win anyways. And my opponent made his first mistake or blunder. I would say, if you notice, the bishop is trapped on h5. If whenever you play moves like g6, trying to fianchetto your bishop, don't be pulling your bishop back to h5, because all I need to do from here is to hit black with pawn to g4, and just like that, we're already winning a piece. He took with the bishop. Let's just take with the pawn, and then he took with the knight. Clearly, the guy missed that my queen was also guarding g4. So let's also take on g4. And now I'm just going to castle on the queen side still, develop my last three pieces, and convert this into a win. Knight to c6 was played. Now, I am ahead in material with a huge lead. I'm 4 points up. So whenever you're 4 points up, take every trade that you get. I am going to play bishop to b5. I'm not necessarily in any rush to take the knight, but if you play something like a6, I'm not going to be pulling back my bishop saying bishops are better than knights. I'm going to take his knight because my lead in material is just so huge. He decided to play bishop to g7. I'm thinking of playing pawn to d5 just to apply pressure to the pin knight, but it usually does not work because black is able to meet d5 with a6, and then if I pull back, he plays b5. Now, the bishop is attacking my d4 pawn. I'm going to use the time to simply castle my king, guarding d4. The knight is not able to take d4 due to the pin. And if he decides to castle his king, it does mean that he has two pieces attacking d4, but I'm ahead by 4 points. I'm just going to take the knight. He castles his king. Let's take the knight. Bishops are better than knights, but not when you're ahead by 4 points. He took with the pawn. Let's complete our development. If you look on my position, my minor pieces are developed. My king is castled. It is time to start my attack. Now, pawn to c5 is a very, very, very interesting move because if I take on c5, his bishop takes, and once my king is exposed. No, I am going to take on c5 though. Why? Because of my huge lead in material. If he takes my knight, my king is not going to be safe, but his king is also not going to be safe. He decided to play queen to b8, applying some pressure to my b2 pawn. So if I move my knight out of the way, I will lose my b2 pawn. Now, all my pieces are active, if you notice, except my h1 rook. Now, rooks needs files. Rook to g1, rook f1, rook e1 is good, but being the aggressive player that I am, I'm going to play the move pawn to h4. This is called a pawn storm, by the way. When it comes to planning in chess, you have to be thinking about pawn breaks and pawn storms and moving your pawns forward to open lines for your pieces. He finally takes back the pawn. Now my rook gets a completely open file. Still don't care if he doubles up my pawn. A queen by itself is not going to checkmate me. Let's play pawn to h5. And this is a pawn break. And once I take on g6, my h rook will enjoy the open file. Queen to b7 was played, and I need to be careful in this position. Basically, if I'm not careful with what I'm doing and he plays rook to b8, I do not have good ways to guard my b2 pawn. For example, if I push b3, I'm going to lose my knight on c3. With that being said, I'm actually going to play the move pawn to e5. What pawn to e5 does, it cuts off the communication between the bishop and my knight, which means if he decides to play rook to b8 and attack b2, I'm able to play b3. I want you guys to notice I'm not just fixated on my plan. I'm not the only one playing chess. I'm not the only one who wants to take the opponent's pieces. I'm aware that the opponent is also trying to take my pieces. So he just played rook to b1. The first thing I'm going to be thinking about whenever my opponent plays a move is what does he want? He's attacking b2 twice. Now I'm going to play b3, guarding the checkmate. And I am aware that I'm pushing pawns on the side that my king is on, which means I am weakening my dark squares a bit. So I'm basically going to be playing the game, being very conscious of that. For example, you place pawn to c4. If I takes, the queen will get the b2 square. I'm not going to do that though. I'm going to continue with my attack. I'm thinking of just taking on b6 here, which I'm going to do. And the reason why I'm going to do it is if he takes with the pawn, the rook gets the open line on his king. And if you're ever able to get an open line pointing towards the opponent's king, then it will lead to something. And if you're able to find this checkmate, then you have potential. If you didn't find it, then I'm sorry, try checkers. I'm joking, it's a nice mate though. Basically, to find the best moves in chess, you start by looking on your forcing moves. So obviously we're going to play queen to e6 check. Now, if queen to e6, rook to f7, the rook is now pinned. I'm going to play the move knight to g5, applying pressure to the pinned rook, and I'm going to win the rook. And that's actually not the checkmate. That's not a checkmate. What I wanted you guys to find is if queen e6, king h8, we sack the rook on h7, the king takes, we swing over the other rook with check. The bishop has to block. Then we take on h6. Still not a checkmate. The king's able to move, but queen to g6 will lead to a checkmate. So let's give a check here. He moves the king to h8. And my fellow viewers, I present to you rook takes h7 check. He has to take my rook. The king has nowhere to go. And then I present to you rook to h1 check. The king still has nowhere to go. He has to block with his bishop. And then I'll grab the bishop. The king has to go here. And that will be a checkmate. He blocks with the bishop. We take on h6 with check. The king now has to go to g7, and that's just a checkmate. Let's keep going. Another game in the books, my opponent started with g3. And because he started with g3, I'm going to play something similar to that for my Indian players. So let's go knight to f6. And I don't mean Indian like actual Indian. There's actually, whenever you play knight f6, g6, bishop e7, and castle, you're playing like an Indian type of opening. So for example, King's Indian, well, not names are India, but there's also Queen's India. So now he plays e4. I guess he doesn't know what he's doing. I mean, e4 is okay. Now, I could go bishop to g7, but I don't want him to play e5. So I'm going to play d6. And it's very similar to the game that I just played. So now you guys are able to see the proper way to play with this setup. He plays b3. He's actually being very inconsistent. Like, why would you play g3 not to fianchet to the bishop? Let me just fianchet to my bishop, though. Get my king out the center of the board. He plays queen to e2. Now let's castle the king. And you don't play b3 or g3 if you do not have intentions of fianchettoing and keep. I think I just missed a very nice move, by the way. My bishop was actually on the same line as his rook. So I should have actually sacked my knight, and then once they take, I win the rook. Don't know how I missed that move. But let's just keep developing here. Let's go knight to c6. Now I have 3 out of 4 pieces developed. I also want you guys to keep in mind, regardless of the opening that I'm playing, I'm still trying to follow the principles. I'm still trying to ensure that all my pieces are developed. Now, bishop to g7 was played. If I go bishop to g5, he plays f3, bishop h5, g4 traps my bishop. I don't want to play bishop e6 because it blocks my pawn. My bishop can't go here. With that being said, I'm just going to play pawn to e5. The downside of this, it does block my bishop out, but eventually I'll be able to play moves like pawn to d5 and open up the center. I may also be able to put my bishop on e6. So he plays knight to d7. Let's just play bishop to e6 here. I want you guys to notice how I have all 4 of my minor pieces developed. My king is castled. What does that mean? It means it's time to start my attack. How do we start our attack, especially when it's opposite side castles? We use pawn storms. How do we do the pawn storms? Launch the pawns towards the opponent's king. That's basically how I won the game before. I'm going to hit him with a4. I'm going to take on b3. My rook is going to get the file. And then that's basically all I need. I'm going to slowly bring more pieces over to his king, and that's the one I'm going to win. So he plays pawn to f4. Maybe he wants to take, maybe he wants to push. Not afraid of any of those moves. He's not developing his last piece. Let's hit him with f4. Well, that's a4. I want to take so that way my rook gets the file. I also want you guys to keep in mind is development does not necessarily complete only when all your minor pieces are developed. You also want to ensure that you get your major pieces in the game. He develops his knight. Let's take on b3. Now my rook gets an open file. He also has to take with the a pawn so that way he does not lose material. Okay, he took with the knight. Now, I wouldn't say that's a free pawn because he's attacking my e5 pawn one, two, three times, and I'm only guarding my e5 pawn one, two times. So what I'm going to do before I take this is I'm going to take on f4, liquidating the position. Remember when I told you guys that my dark squared bishop is going to rejoin the game? That's what I was referring to. He took back. Now we take the pawn on a2. And just like that, I'm already ahead by a pawn, and this king is about to get attacked. So my opponent played the move knight to g5, and I think there's some tactical ideas somewhere in the position. I'm seeing the fact that my rook is on the same line as his queen. So, I mean, he's attacking my bishop anyway, so I'm definitely going to take the knight. And the whole idea of taking the knight, because yes, I'm giving up a bishop for a knight, but once I take the knight, the pawn takes back my bishop, opens up this rank pointing towards his queen, which means his bishop is pinned. And once he takes, because his bishop is pinned, all I need to do is apply pressure to the pinned bishop. How am I going to do that? I'm just going to move my knight out the way. But I'm not going to just randomly move my knight out the way to, let's say, h5, even though that's a good move because it looks like it went a pawn. I don't want him to be able to like move a pawn to e5. I'm not going to lie. Like I was thinking of sacking my knight on e4. And then regardless of what he takes, if I just take the bishop, and then he's forced to sack his queen and I win the queen. Yeah, let's do that. Let's take on e4. If he takes with the knight, I'm just going to take, hit the queen. If he does not sack his queen, then queen to a8, followed by queen to a1 will be a checkmate. So look with the bishop. Now I'm going to play the move rook takes b2. My bishop guards it. I'm assuming he's going to sacrifice his queen. If he just moves his queen away, then I will hit him with queen a8 with the idea of playing queen to a1. And then obviously if he sacked the queen, it means I'm ahead by a lot of material, which means all I need to do from that point is to start trading pieces off the board and win the game. He did not sack the queen, which means we spoke about it already. Queen to a8. Now, how is he going to prevent queen to a1? Not sure. It's resignation. It's GG's. Let's see the amount of time he's going to use. He plays pawn to d4. I guess he's just trying to prolong it a bit because all I'm going to do from here is play queen to a1 check. The king can't move. He has to block with the bishop, and then that will be a checkmate. So let's go queen to a1 check. The bishop has to block, and that's a checkmate. Let's keep going. Another one. Let's go e4 this time around. E5 was played, and we're going to be playing knight f3, hitting the pawn, pawn to d6, blocks out the pawn, and I'm going to play an Italian game for this one. Bishop to g4, that's not necessarily a bad move actually, because he's developing his pieces. Let me just use the time to continue with my development. If he takes on f3, then that would be him moving the same pieces more than once in the opening stage of the game. And then he'll be breaking principles. Now he plays the move knight to c6. Now, there's actually a trap in this line. Maybe my opponent is not going to fall for it. So I just want to show you guys what it looks like. So keep in mind, if I take on e5 and he takes my queen, I'm able to take on f7 with check. King moves to e7, knight b5 is a checkmate. However, if I take on e5 and he decides to take with the knight, I'm losing. So taking on e5 is not necessarily the move, which is why a lot of players, they usually play h3 to chase away the bishop first. Now, if the bishop goes back to h5, that's when we're able to take on e5. Let's play pawn to h2. Usually they take on f3 or pull their bishop back to e6 though. This one decided to take on f3. So let's play queen takes f3. I am threatening checkmate on f7. He decided to move his knight to d4 and attack my queen, which means it's just a checkmate. I'll continue to show you how these guys are making mistakes. So stick around. Back with the black pieces. H3 was played. Terrible move. Let's just play e5. Now, this is a good lesson for you guys. Whenever you notice that your opponent is playing an opening that you're not familiar with, then you should just follow regular principles. Now, the mistakes that he's making, by the way, is he is making a bunch of unnecessary pawn moves. But let's just control the center of the board. My two pawns are controlling the center. He plays another move. Let's just develop. Again, I do not know the opening that he's playing, so I'm just gonna develop my pieces. Pawn to g4 was played. Let's just keep developing. And then he plays bishop to g2. Now it looks like he's playing something, but I'm just going to continue with my development here. Let's go bishop to c5. Now I have 3 out of 4 pieces developed. My plan is to castle my king and develop my last piece. Queen to e2 was played. You definitely don't want to be moving your queen this early. Let me just get my king out the center of the board though. If he keeps his king in the center of the board for too long, we know what we're going to do. We're going to open the center and attack his king. Now, he plays pawn to g5, which is attacking my knight, and it is forcing me to move the same piece more than once, but I'm not afraid of a pawn on g5. In fact, once I play knight to e4, putting a piece on his half of the board, I am attacking his g-pawn. Made another mistake by giving up his bishop for a knight. Let's just take on e4 here. My queen gets the line. This pawn is unprotected. Guy just does not want to develop his pieces. A punishment is coming pretty soon. He plays pawn to b4, attacking my unprotected bishop, and I want to sacrifice that bishop actually. I'm not going to move the bishop. Offense is the best defense. His rook is unprotected, his light squared bishop is missing. I'm going to take on g5 because if he dares to touch my bishop, I'll hit him with queen to g2, trapping the rook, which has nowhere to go, and then I'll just take the rook. So let's take on g5. Let's see if he's going to continue taking material, making unnecessary pawn moves. He took the bishop. Let's hit him with queen to g2. I'm down by a piece, but that rook is trapped, and he's not even able to move the knight. Anywhere he moves the knight will be taken. But I'm definitely going to take the rook on the next move. Like, I don't care what he plays, I'm going to grab the rook. He plays f4. Obviously, I'm not going to take the queen because that would be losing. So let's take the rook. Now, I'm the one who is ahead in material, and his knight is also pinned. So he has to ensure that he guards the knight, which is why he played queen to f2. I could simply take on h2 if I wanted. That is a free pawn. But I'm trying to open the position as best as I can. So let's take on f4. When it comes to opening a position, it has a lot to do with getting rid of as much pawns as you possibly can. So now that he takes, I also want to play e3. Like it's a pawn sacrifice, but I must open the position. So let's play pawn to e3 in this position, hitting the queen, hitting the pawn. Yes, he's able to take, but after that, I'll continue with my development, knowing that once I get my rook on these files, it's gonna be game over for him. Let's just develop my bishop though. I just need to get these pieces in the game. As you can see, you never necessarily want to have your rooks pointing towards your own pawns like this. So first I'm going to start with rook to e8, pinning this pawn, putting my rook on the same line as the opponent's king. That's always a good sign. Taking on c2 was always a free pawn, by the way. He decided to add some extra layer of protection to his knight. He's also threatening to play knight to g3 in some lines, forking my queen and my bishop, but I'm just going to get as much pieces in the game as possible. Again, if you look on my moves, I literally only move my central pawns. I do not make unnecessary pawn moves. You notice there's no h6 or a6 here. I don't play moves like these unless I have to chase something out of my half of the board. Now, he develops his bishop. Looks like he's trying to get castled. That I do not want to allow. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to take this pawn on c2 and it prevents his king from castle. I want to keep his king in the center of the board. And there's actually an idea here where I could play queen to d5 followed by queen to d8. And if his rook takes, my other rook takes, and that's going to be a checkmate. Now, oh boy, knight to g3 was such a good move. Did I just blunder? Because if I move my queen here, I'm going to lose my bishop. That's a nice move. I I did not see that. That's a discovered attack. Because now my queen is under attack. I have to move my queen. And I can't go here, 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 here. I have to go here. So no need to think about it. Let's just play queen to d5. And I lost my bishop. However, however, There's this thing in chess called the drawback principle. The queen no longer guards this pawn on e3. And this is why Bobby Fischer says tactics flows from a superior position. And this is why persons say whenever you're a strong chess player, you always tend to get lucky. But it's just because I have my pieces on good squares. How is he going to survive this attack? I mean, he should be able to block with one of his knights, but now what I'm thinking of is playing moves like queen to g2, which is definitely what I'm going to play. I'm not even going to be looking on my other options because queen to g2, it applies pressure to his pin knight. And believe it or not, I am threatening a checkmate on g1. Pin piece does not protect. His knight on e2 is not guarding his g1 knight. The g1 knight is an unprotected piece. I want you guys to treat this video like a series. Like, it's not something that I'm expecting you guys to watch in one day, but watch to a certain level, go to sleep, play some games, come back to the video, keep watching, and there's no way you're going to invest. I don't even know how long this video is going to be, but let's just say it's a 6 hour video. There's no way you're going to invest 6 hour, 10 hour into like really learning the fundamentals and learning my thought process and you don't yield any results from it. Also, I wanted to tell you guys like if you're someone who is planning on watching the full video, if you could just leave a comment on what your rating is right now, just leave the comment right there. And then maybe in like a week after you watch the video and then you played a few games, I just want you to come back and then respond to that comment and just let me know what's your ratings now. Like I want to see if you take like 2 weeks or a week or some days to watch this video, if it's gonna impact your rating. And if I could get like a lot of persons to comment something like that, then that would mean that this video is helping people. He plays knight to f3. Now, the queen is clearly guarding this, so I'm not going to take. That's not a checkmate because the knight guards. And if I check here, the king gets to move to this square. So let's just take the knight on f3 for now. And just like that, I got back my material. He plays rook to d1, trying to exchange. I mean, I'm ahead by 4 points. Like, I want to trade, but I'm not going to trade because once you're attacking someone, you want to ensure that you keep the attacking pieces on the board. So instead of trading the rooks off the board, the knight is pinned. I'm already applying pressure to the knight. I'm going to play the move rook to e8, apply even more pressure to the knight. Now I'm actually threatening to just take the knight, and that's going to lead to a checkmate. He has to find rook d2 or bishop e5 to not lose the game immediately. He found bishop to e5, but let's just take on e5 in this position. Once he takes back, I'm not going to take with this rook because he is able to check me on the background. Wouldn't be a checkmate though, but I'm not going to take with this rook. And now I have 3 pieces applying pressure to his pin knight. He only has 2 pieces guarding it, which means now he definitely has to find rook to d2. Well, he didn't find rook to d2. He found queen to d3 instead, but that does not help because there's a checkmate in 2 moves here. I'm going to start by taking the knight. The king can't move. The queen has to take, and then that's going to be a checkmate. So let's take the knight. The queen has to take. Now, queen takes queen is a checkmate, but that's also a checkmate. Let's keep climbing up the ladder. Another opponent, he started off by playing pawn to b3. This is called the Nimza Larsen attack, but let's just assume that you don't know the name of this opening. Just play pawn to e5 or pawn to d5. It doesn't really matter what you play at this point. Just ensure that you're developing your pieces. So he developed his bishop to attack my pawn. I'm just going to develop my knight here, guarding the pawn on e5 and then he plays pawn to b3. Now, this basically means he's trying to double fianchetto his bishop, and I'm just going to continue to control the center of the board. There's no way for me to win the game here. He did play knight to f3, which is usually not good because I am able to play a move like pawn to e5, and it will be forcing him to move the same piece more than once. So let's just play pawn to e5, forcing him to move the knight again. And then he moves the knight. Now, I want you guys to keep in mind, to take is still a mistake. But once I take this knight and his bishop takes, I'm not going to hit him with pawn to c5, keeping more space. And then once I have the space advantage, then I'm still forcing him to move his bishop more than once anyway. So once the bishop takes, let's hit him with c5. He still has to move the bishop again. And then I'll continue with my development. Now, from here, I'm predicting that he's going to castle on the king side. The guy just pulled his bishop to d4, pull it back to b2 just to take on f6. Terrible move, by the way. Like, don't be giving up your bishops for knights like this, guys. It also attacks his rook. It also forces him to make another unnecessary pawn move. But hey, let's just develop. Let's just develop. Develop my bishop. I'm two moves away from completing my development. Once I develop my bishop and castle my king, my development is complete. He plays pawn to d3. Now, if I takes, his queen takes, and then he's automatically attacking my pawn. So to take is still a mistake. Instead, I'm going to develop my bishop. And then if he takes, then I'll take. So he took, if I take, I hit his rook. If he plays f3, he hits my bishop. If I move my bishop, I lose my pawn. Do I want to lose a pawn? No. Okay, I can always take with the pawn and then he plays e3 and I'm fine. But I'm actually going to take with the bishop. I actually want to lose a pawn. And hopefully you know why I want to lose the pawn. But if you're not able to answer that question, it's because, okay, let's pull the bishop back first. Now, if his queen takes, it basically means he's helping me to open the center. And I'm about to get my king out the center. Well, he didn't take the pawn. I'm still going to get my king out the center of the board. And I'm still not going to try to protect the pawn because if he takes the pawn, he's helping me to open the center. So he took the pawn at the worst possible time. Hopefully, you found the tactic. But my rook is on the same line as the opponent's queen. This is called a discovered attack. And all I need to do is to move my bishop out the way. So to win this game, I'm going to take the pawn on g3, which comes with a check. My opponent now has to react to this check. It doesn't matter if he takes my bishop or move the king. He decided to move the king. I will be taking that queen on the next move. And then now if he takes the bishop, it just means that he was wasting time. He didn't decide to take the bishop though, which means that's just a checkmate. Let's keep going. So we're now playing with the white pieces. Let's play e4 in this position. I want to switch it up a bit. He plays e5, and I'm going to play knight c3. I want to play a Vienna game or a Vienna Gambit. He decided to play knight to c6. Let's go bishop to c4 here. This is the Vienna game. And the idea is not to put the knight on f3 because you want to play pawn to f4 in the future. Now, it's very important that whenever you're choosing which opening that you want to play, you know why is the opening good, but you also need to know the downside of the opening. There's not going to be an opening out there that does not have a downside. Like that's not how chess works. If you know how the drawback principle works, it basically means if you move a piece, you leave something unprotected. He develops his knight. Now, if I develop my knight, he could actually take on e5 and then I'm cooked. But in this position, I could actually play knight to e2 before I play f4, and I can also play f4 followed by knight to f3. So both of these are perfectly playable moves. I'm actually going to just play the move pawn to f4 in this position. Again, I have to be careful about this diagonal. If a bishop goes to c5, it's going to be hard for me to get my king castle. He decided to take on f4. And now I'm just going to play the move knight to f3. Like, I'm not worried about not having the chance to regain this pawn. Once I hit him with pawn to d4, then my bishop is going to take the pawn. There's no easy ways for him to guard the pawn either. So he decided to play pawn to h6. It looks like he's trying to play pawn to g5 and guard the pawn, but this is actually wrong. I'm just going to, like, I could play h4 to prevent this, but I want to allow him to be greedy. Let's play pawn to d4. Please play g5 thinking you're ahead by a pawn and now you're going to win the game. Let's see what he does. Okay, he didn't do it, but then he decided to play pawn to d5. Guy does not know how to count, by the way, because now I'm attacking the square three times. He's only guarding the square twice. So already I'm thinking of how do I want to take this pawn? Do I take, hit the knight? Knight goes back, takes, then he has knight takes. I could also take here, but then his knight is going to take here. So let's just take, hit the knight. Okay, he decided to check my king, and actually was not expecting that. That's not a bad move at all. Because I also want to play king f2, but there's knight g4, and if king d2, queen here is a checkmate. If knight here is going to take, I was not expecting that move. Okay, for now, let's just block with the bishop. I'm going to get my king out the center of the board. His queen and his king is on the same line. So if I'm able to get my rook on the e file, then that would be good. I mean, I'm attacking his knight now. He just needs to move it to b5 and try to regain his pawn on d5. Okay, he plays knight to b4. Correct move. And here I need to get my king out the center of the board, first and foremost. And then what he needs to do from here is to simply take on d5. But it's a very, very tricky situation. Because his queen and his king is on the same line and he has pieces in the center of the board, this could go left if he's not careful. For example, before I take back this knight, I'm actually going to hit him with bishop to b5, checking his king. Why am I doing this? I want to ensure that I clear this file so that way I'm able to play a move like rook to e1, pinning his king to his queen. He blocks with the pawn. Now let's go rook to e1. He's not able to take my bishop. This is called danger levels. He is able to play knight to e3, which he did not play, and he decided to take my knight on c3, which is bad. Now, it looks like he wanted to try an in-between move. Knight e3 was the move, because all I'm going to do is, even though my queen is hanging, I'm going to take his queen with a check. So now he's forced to take my rook, and then I'm just going to take the knight. And just like that, he has no queen. However, once he takes my bishop, he's not completely losing, but he did not decide to take the bishop. Now, instead of just moving my bishop out the way, because if I move my bishop out the way, he takes this pawn, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the move queen to e1, counter-attacking the knight, guarding my pawn, which means if he now decides to take my bishop, I'll take his knight. And if he decides to develop and protect his knight, I move my bishop out the way, and then I don't lose my pawn. So he decided to play f5, protecting his knight. Now I move my bishop out the way, applying some pressure to his knight. I didn't lose my pawn, which means I'm just ahead by 3 entire points in this position. He decided to play pawn to c5, which that's not good because I have two pieces attacking the knight. He only has one piece guarding the knight. So now I'm just going to take the knight. And then once he takes, my queen is going to take. His king is in the center of the board. Queen g6 is coming. The guy didn't even take back the bishop. Uh, so I'm not going to take his pawn. I'm going to move my bishop to d5. His king is not able to get castled. I'm controlling these lights. I guess he just prefers to take pawns. I am pinning his bishop to his king. And whenever you're pinning a piece, you want to apply pressure to the pin piece. And this will lead to a checkmate. And for the persons who are asking if I do one-on-one lessons, I used to do a lot of one-on-one lessons, but because I have 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, I don't really do a lot anymore. I try to do 3 per day. So if you want to get one-on-one help from me, I do not have a lot of space, and I'm assuming, well, my opponent resigns. Let's keep going. So we're playing with white here. My opponent plays d5. Well, d4. Let's play d5 here, something very simple. And he's playing the Queen's Gambit. Now, what I'm going to play here is I'm going to play e6, and this is called the Queen's Gambit declined. And about the one-on-ones that I was talking about, I was just telling you guys that I only do 3 per day, and once it's full, I will not be accepting anymore. So if you're watching this and it's like maybe the first week, then maybe I have space. If it's like a month or 2 months in advance, then maybe I do not have any space for one-on-ones. He developed his bishop though, and I want to teach you guys a setup whenever you play against d4. First of all, I'm going to play the move knight to f6, developing my knight. What you're going to do here is you're going to play bishop e7 and you're going to castle your king. Now, after you do this, he develops his knight. Let's go bishop to e7. The goal is to simply castle my king. And then once I get my king castled, it's now going to be time to get my queen side pieces developed. A lot of persons usually have issues developing their light squared bishop, so I'm going to ensure that I tell you all the ways in which you can develop your light squared bishop. He decided to check with his queen, and I could simply block with the bishop or the knight, but I'm just going to play pawn to c6 in this position because remember what I tell you guys, once you're going to be playing against d4, you're going to use your c pawn either to guard your center or c5 to attack the opponent's center. Now, he plays knight to c3. I'm going to get my king up the center of the board, and now I'm going to try to develop my queen side pieces. He plays pawn to e3. White is playing very well, by the way. I haven't seen any mistakes so far. Let me develop my knight. Now I have 3 pieces developed. My bishop is actually the only piece that has not yet been developed. But now I'm going to show you guys how I'm going to turn this bishop, which is so bad. I have 7 pawns on a light square. and the light squared bishop, but I'll get my bishop in the game. So here's my plan. My plan is to get my bishop on this diagonal, but I have three pawns on the diagonal. So what am I going to do? First, I'm going to take on c4, getting rid of one of the pawns. Then I'm going to play b5, so that way my bishop goes to b7. Then I'm going to play c5 and attack the center, and then my bishop will get a very long diagonal. He has to take with the queen, by the way. If he takes with the bishop, then b5 is just winning. So he actually did not take back. He plays a3. Now I'm still gonna play b5, not because I want to be greedy and hold on to my pawn, but because I want to complete my development. So his queen now has to move, and then I'll be able to play bishop to b7 and put my bishop on this diagonal. Now the job is actually not finished because you don't want to have your bishop pointing towards a pawn like this. So I still need to move my pawn from c6 to c5, and that's when my bishop is going to enjoy the long diagonal. So he plays pawn to e4. That's a nice move. If I play c5 here, then his knight could take my pawn on b5, and then I'll just be down by a pawn. So let's just play pawn to a6 first, guarding my pawn chain here. And by the way, I'm not afraid if he plays pawn to e5 and attack my knight, because he's just going to be helping me to put my knight in the center of the board. Now, one downside of this is my light squared, he did it, so let's play knight d5. If he takes my knight, then my light squared bishop is going to be very bad, and then I'm going to have to show you guys another way in which I'm going to get my bishop in the game. So he took with the knight. Let's take with the e pawn, not the c pawn, because we still want to play c5, so that way this bishop is active. He plays pawn to b3. My c4 pawn is heavily guarded. So let's just focus on finding a home for this bishop. So let's play pawn to c5. Keep in mind, if he takes this pawn, I'm going to take it with the d pawn. And then my bishop gets the long diagonal. Otherwise, okay, he did take the pawn. He's basically helping me. And this is why to take is a mistake, guys. Like, the guy was playing very, very well. Looks like he just knows the opening moves. Let's just take on c4, though. And this is the reason why it is more beneficial to not just study the opening, but to actually put more time into the end game, because everybody is gonna know the first few moves. But what are you gonna do when you're in the end game? Everybody's gonna get to the end game. The game has to get to an end game, especially if you're not gonna be playing terrible moves, losing from the opening. So please invest more time in your end games instead of the opening. And let me know if you guys want like some end game videos. He took on c5 again, very, very kind person, because all he's doing, he's helping my knight to have a good square. My bishop is now on a good diagonal. My queen is now on a file. I managed to get all my minor pieces doing very, very good roles. Now I need to ensure that I get my major pieces in the game. He decided to play queen to f5. There is a piece on my half of the board. We spoke about this too much time. If a piece is on your half of the board, you must neutralize that piece. I'm not going to play g6 though, because you don't necessarily want to be pushing pawns on the side that your king is on. So I'm going to look for a move that I can play on his half of the board. And that's where the move bishop to e4 comes in, because my bishop is attacking his queen, and now his queen has to move. Queen is not necessarily trapped, but my position here is just so good, and I'm ahead by a pawn. He moves his queen to g4. Now that all my pieces are doing something, this is when I'm going to start my attack. And my major pieces are not doing anything though, so I need to get these pieces in the game. But let me just start by playing the move knight to d3 check, hitting the king, hitting the rook, which means he has to take with the bishop. The question is, do I take with the queen or the bishop? I really like the idea of taking with the queen. Now I have two pieces on his half of the board. His king is also not able to get castled. He plays bishop to h6, but that's not good because offense is the best defense. Yes, I can take. Definitely not going to push and lose my rook. I'm going to play the move bishop to g6. Now there's no mate, and I'm threatening his bishop. So he is still forced to move his bishop. And then once he moves the bishop, it will be giving me more time to get the rest of my pieces in the game. Now, he plays rook to d1. It's not a bad move. He is also using offense as the best defense. Now, if I check him here, he blocks with the bishop. If I check him here, he also blocks with the bishop. And then I take here. I'm only ahead by one pawn, but that should be enough to start trading pieces off the board. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play queen to c2. I don't want him to get castled, that's the thing. But if he castles now, he loses the bishop. If he moves the bishop, then I should be able to play bishop to d3, preventing his castle. It's a very, very tricky situation. Let's see. He plays rook to d7. He is attacking my bishop, but his king is not safe, so I don't know why he's doing that. The thing is, if I take his bishop, he takes my bishop, so I'm actually going to play the move bishop to b4, checking his king. Now, the best move for him in this position is to block with the bishop, but I want you guys to notice something. The queen and the rook is on the same diagonal, and they are on light squares. Well, he decided to move his king. Before I hit him with a tactical blow, I wanted to play bishop to f5. It definitely doesn't work here though, because that's a checkmate, but he didn't block with the bishop, so he's basically asking to be checkmated. I want to play bishop to g6 check. Unfortunately, he moves the king and it will not lead to a checkmate because his king is going to run here. With that being said, let's just take the free bishop that he just gave to me. I'm now not able to move my bishop due to this pin. Whenever one of your pieces are pinned, it's very, very, very important that you get out of that pin as quickly as possible. He's applying some pressure to my pinned bishop. It's fine though, it's heavily guarded. So I'm just going to play the move pawn to h5, attacking his queen. He moves his queen to f3, which means there's no pin happening here anymore. And as I was saying, my rooks are not doing anything. That's a very active rook, and it's on my seventh rank. So I'm definitely going to play the move rook to d8. One, I'm neutralizing the opponent's pieces on my half of the board. And two, I'm trying to get control over this open d file. Because if his rook takes and I take back, rook to d1 could lead to a checkmate. He took, let's take. I'm threatening to check here, not a checkmate, but he will be able, well, it will be a checkmate. He took here, I'm going to check here. The king just can't move. He has to sack his queen. And then once I take, that's going to be a checkmate. So let's give a check. Has to sack his queen. He took with the queen, but that's a checkmate. Let's keep going. All right, next opponent, we're going to play e4 this time around. And then after e5, I'm going to play knight c3 again. I mean, I won the last game, but I don't think it was clean. Knight c6, let's go bishop c4. This is the Vienna game, by the way. And then he plays bishop to b4. Now, whenever they play bishop to b4, applying pressure to the knight, you want to play knight to e2, just having your knights supporting each other. d6 was played, and now I'll simply castle my king. Now, black is developing the pieces. Bishop to g4. I'm not sure how well of a move that is. I mean, I'm just going to play h3 and just chase the bishop out of my half of the board. Now, it would have been good for him to just pull the bishop back, but he didn't. So now I'll take with the queen. And I only have one more piece that needs development, and that's my dark squared bishop. He developed his knight, applying some pressure to e4, but e4 is guarded. So let's just play d3 here, preparing to complete my development. Knight to d4 was played. That's a good move. It's attacking my queen. And I have to be careful where I put my queen because c2 is also under attack. But I'm just going to pull my queen back to d1. Eventually, I'll chase that knight out of my half of the board. And once he castles his king, now I'll simply play bishop to g5. My development is now complete. His knight is pinned. I was applying pressure to the pin knight. Well, I was threatening to apply pressure to the pin knight, but he decided to play h6, which is a blunder, by the way, because I am going to give up my bishop for a knight. And if he takes with the pawn, he's exposing his king. And if he takes with the queen, that's a fork. Now, let's take the knight. He quickly took with the queen, and that's just a fork. So he's now forced to move his queen away. I'll simply take the free bishop, and I'm winning the game. He pulls his queen back. Let's take the free bishop. And now that we're ahead in material, what's the goal? The goal is to trade as much pieces off the board. He plays pawn to c6. Maybe he wants to play d5 or b5 or a5, especially a5 to trap my knight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play c3. It attacks his knight and it creates a running square for my knight. And then he puts his knight on b5. And Grandmaster Maurice Ashley, he calls it the Grandmaster trade. If you're gonna, anytime you're gonna be giving up a bishop for a knight, it has to be a Grandmaster trade, which means you know that you shouldn't give up your bishop for a knight, but you're deciding to do it because there's other factors in the position. I'm doing it because, for one, my knight gets this d5 square. This is called an outpost or an ole, which it basically means when you put your piece on a square that is not being guarded by a pawn, it's a weakness. But if the opponent is never able to chase that piece out, then it's just in a hole. And I call this like the everlasting knight. It's like a permanent knight. And the other reason why I'm giving up my bishop for a knight is because I'm ahead in my T-Rock. Now, for all my Vienna players out there, your main thematic plan is going to be f4, not d4. But I have a student who he always plays f4 and get in trouble on this diagonal. So if you're going to be playing the Vienna game, either you one, always check to see if there's a check that's coming on this diagonal, or two, just move your king out the way. There's no checks coming on this diagonal though because my knight covers the square. So I'm just going to continue my attack. I haven't moved any of my major pieces. So I'm going to play the move queen to g4, connecting my rooks while putting my queen on the same line as the opponent's king. He took on c3. Let's just take back on c3. My rook could now get this far, and then my f rook could get this far. And then he took on f4. Guys, please remember that to take is a mistake. All he's doing is helping my pieces to get open files. Now I'm just going to play the move rook takes f4. My rooks are just very active in this position. He plays pawn to f6, weakening this diagonal, also weakening the light squares. I'm not seeing the immediate punishment though, so let's just put this rook on b1. Rooks do need files. Now, every single one of my pieces are actively placed. He then moves his queen to c8, thinking that I want to trade. Nah, he actually moved his queen to c8 because he was trying to guard the pawn. But that's obviously a blunder because the queen is no longer guarding the e7 square. So I'm just going to hit him with knight to e7, checking the king, winning the queen. The king now has to move. I'll win the queen, and he resigns. He moves the king out the way. Now, before I take the queen, I'm going to play the move queen to g6 check. Just so that way I keep his king in the corner. And then once his king move, I take his queen. My goal is to get my rook on the seventh rank. Let's take, always remember, rook's on the seventh is in heaven. And I was threatening a checkmate that he decided to prevent. Now, I think rook takes f6 is the correct move, but I want to be fancy. So let's play rook to h6. Like, I'm actually threatening to sack my rook, and that's gonna be a checkmate. But I'm not gonna sack the rook. He took on c3. There's a mating two here. I could take with the rook, and then once he takes, queen takes, and that's mate. But why sacrifice your rook when you can sacrifice your queen? He's not able to move the king. The pawn has to take, and that's just a checkmate. Let's keep going. Next opponent, we're going to be playing d4 this time around, and b6 was played. Now, let's just play e4 here, putting two pawns in the center. His bishop is attacking my pawn. I'll develop my knight and protect my pawn. And then he plays pawn to e6. Now, let's just keep developing. Let's play knight to f3. We have two of our pieces developed. He developed his bishop, pinning my knight to my king. And because pin pieces does not protect, it basically means my knight is no longer guarding this pawn. To solve this problem, I'll just develop my bishop and protect the pawn. He took with his bishop, which is bad. You should not be giving up your bishop for a knight that easily. Let's just take, I didn't even chase away the guy's bishop. And then he plays pawn to d5. Now, I could take and I can also push. If I take, his queen or his bishop takes, and I'm just helping the guy's pieces to be on good scores. However, if I maintain the tension in the position, hit him with e5, the knight is not able to go to f6, and his light squared bishop becomes a bad piece. He develops his knight to d7, decent move. Let me simply use the time to get my king out the center of the board, and he plays queen to e7. Looks as if he's trying to castle on the queen side, and we know what to do when there's opposite side castles, right? We're going to start an attack with a pawn star. But before I do that, I'm thinking of the idea of playing bishop to g5 with the queen, and if f6, I takes, but he is able to play queen a3. So let's just play a4. I want to play a5, open the line for my rook, and start my attack on his king. He decided to play a5, preventing a4. Now I'm able to play bishop to g5, attacking his queen, which is not able to go to a3, And yes, he's able to play f6. And yes, I'm going to take. And yes, I'm helping him to develop his knight. But he has a backward pawn. And this is now going to be my new target, which is why I'm going to play the move rook to e1, getting my major pieces in the game. Now, all my minor pieces are developed. My queen and my rook are the only pieces that I have not yet moved. He decided to castle his king, getting his king out the center of the board. Makes a lot of sense. And now I'm just going to continue my attack. His e6 pawn is weak. Bishop to f5 applies pressure to his pinned pawn because if he takes, he's going to lose his queen. However, if I play bishop f5, knight to f8 definitely guards the e6 pawn. So let's not do that. Let's just play knight to e5, getting my pieces as forward as possible. And this is just a very strong knight. Like, he's not able to take because I take it. The knight, pawn h6 attacks my bishop. But that was a mistake. It's a drawback mistake. Remember that whenever you move a piece, ask your pieces what were they doing. If you had just asked this pawn what was it doing, the pawn would have told him that he was guarding the g6 square, but he did not do that, which means now I'm able to just play the move knight to g6, forking the queen and the rook. Now he has to move the queen, and I'll already be winning an exchange. He moves the queen out the way, and I was actually planning on taking this knight first, then taking the rook. But I am actually able to simply take the rook. So let's just take the rook. Because if he decides to take my bishop, knight here would have been a fork, which is why he took on h8. But hey, I'm ahead by 2 points. How do we play chess when we're ahead by 2 points? We start trading pieces off the board. Let's perform the grandmaster trade. Yes, we're giving up our bishop for a knight. He could take with the pawn or the knight. Either way, I'm just going to play the move queen to h5 here, connecting my rooks. Now my rooks are connected, and I'm just doing fine here. Like, I'm still trying to trade more pieces off the board. I'm going to be targeting this weak e6 pawn. So he decided to play pawn to f5, which makes some sense because he wants to play knight to f6 and attack my queen. With that being said, I'm just going to pull my queen back to f3. Knight f6 is actually a blunder, and if he plays knight f6, he is at risk of losing a piece. He didn't play knight f6, he plays h5. My whole idea is to sacrifice my rook on e6, and then once the queen takes, I take on f5. It doesn't work now though because the knight is there and it's not a pin. With that being said, I'm going to play the move rook to e2. I'm not playing hope chess here. I want to double up my rook and win this pawn. But if he moves the knight, he's going to lose the game. He plays pawn to h4. This is how you deal with a pawn storm, by the way. You don't necessarily have to react to it too much. Just keep bringing pieces in the game. And then the moment the pawn goes to h3, you just play pawn to g3. And then the rook will still be pointing towards its own pawn. He moves his king out the way. It looks like he knows what's up. But I already have two pieces attacking e6. He only has his queen guarding e6. So let's just take on e6. That's a free pawn. We're now ahead by 3 points. This pawn is also going to be hanging. He plays queen to a3, hits this and this at the same time. So was not a terrible move. But let's just play queen takes f5 in this position. I am x-raying his unprotected knight on b7. So he still needs to be careful. He pulls his knight back to f8 to attack my rook. And I'm thinking of just giving a check here. Like, that's not bad. It's not going to be leading to any checkmate, though. That's the issue. But let's give a check here because my rook is under attack. He has to move his king. And if I'm able to get my queen right here, that's going to be a checkmate. So let's play the move queen to f6. Attack the unprotected rook. Let him defend the unprotected rook. Then hit him with queen to d8 with the idea of playing queen to b8. He plays bishop to c6. Guys, defending. Okay, can I sack the rook? If I still go here and he takes the rook, I give a check here. The king is not able to go here, so the king has to go here. Then rook takes e8 is going to be a checkmate. Offense is the best defense, guys. And I mean, guys also blundering his rook and he's blundering his bishop. Like, this is just game. Do I just take the bishop then? Why not just take the bishop? And then, regardless of the next move that he plays, I just take on c7 and that's mate. Let's just take the bishop. Rook a8 is mate, queen a8 is mate, queen c7 is mate. This is GG's. He moves his knight out the way, and then he resigns. Let's keep going. Another opponent in the book. Let's play e4 this time around. The opponent plays e5, And I'm gonna play f4. This is the king's gambit. It's a very, very aggressive but risky line because I am exposing this diagonal pointing towards my king. So for example, if I take on e5, the queen comes in on h4, and if I push, he takes, and I'm losing my rook. So after he develops his knight, let's play knight to f3 first, guarding the h4 square, so there's no queen that is able to go here. And then after he plays d6, I'll continue with my development. Now, to continue with my development, I'll just play bishop to b5 here, pinning the knight to the king, the same knight that is guarding the pawn on e5. So in some lines, I am threatening to win a pawn. He played bishop to d7. Let's not try to rush the position though. Let's just get our king out the center of the board. It is also somewhat similar to a Vienna. So if you're a Vienna player, you can also play with these plans. He did play pawn to e6, and we are about to do a grandmaster trade, right? If I takes bishop takes, take a free pawn, he's gonna hit me with queen to d4, and then I'm gonna be losing my knight. Nah, let's pull back the bishop. That does not work. He plays a5, let's pull the bishop back again. That's fine. I want you guys to notice that guy's king is in the center of the board, and he still has not yet moved any of these pieces. He's only moving pawns, queenside pieces, and moving the same pieces more than once in the opening. Now, I would love to ensure that this F file is open. So let's play pawn takes, and it basically means I'm opening the F file. I'm not even sure what he's gonna do. The best he has to do here is take my bishop. Like, if he doesn't take the bishop, he could be in some deep trouble. I'm not gonna lie. And if he takes my knight or take the pawn, then this is something that a lot of Vienna players could relate to. So he decided to take the bishop first. That's the move. Let's just take back the pawn. My rook gets this open file, so that's good. And this rook also has an open file. I haven't developed any of my queenside pieces as it, so I need to develop. He plays bishop to g4, pinning my knight to my queen, which means he's now just trying to take back a free pawn. And then if I takes, I'm helping him to develop his bishop. But I do have an idea. I am going to take, for one, I'm ahead by a pawn. Who doesn't like free pawns? But two, after his bishop takes, I'm actually going to play pawn to e5. And no, after the bishop takes, I'm not able to take due to the spin. The plan was to let him take so that way the e file is open. He did not go into that line though. So I'm considering d4, but if I play d4, he's going to take and attack my queen. And then once I takes, the bishop takes. That's a check. The king has to move. Yes, I'm threatening a checkmate. How does he guard the mate though? If knight h6, I take the knight. If pawn f6, I take. If queen d7, I take the rook. Let's go for this risky line. It's a very nice idea. If he moves the bishop, I may just play c3 or king h1. Probably c3 because it's usually good to have your pawns in chains like this. Okay, he decided to take with the bishop. Horrible move, by the way. Now, he's probably saying, you're not able to take with the knight due to the pin. And I know that, which is why I'm going to take with the queen. And then if the queen takes, now I'm able to take with the knight. So he just blundered a piece. So he took with the queen. Let's just take with the knight. I'm ahead by 3 points already in this position. I'm yet to develop my last two minor pieces. He decided to castle his king. His rook no longer guards this pawn, so that could be a free pawn in the future, but his rook is attacking my knight. Now, what I'm going to do is, do I want to hit him with knight c6? What I need to do is finish my development. Let's go bishop to e3, develop my bishop, guard the knight, finish my development. I mean, that's a free pawn and that's a free pawn. I'm going to be winning material here regardless. He plays f6. If I takes, I help him to develop his knight. If I push, he pushes here. Okay, and then I go here. I think I'm doing fine. I can also takes, and then if he takes, I move my knight. I have so many good moves. Let's take this pawn on a6. If he takes here, I'm gonna be able to take on b5, seeing that it's unprotected. He took. Let's take here, and now my knight on b1 is the only piece that's not doing anything. Whoa! Bishop to e2. That's a good move. That's a fork. Ah, how do I get out of this? Okay, let me show you guys. Here's how my brain was working. Because I actually did not see bishop e2. He's attacking my rook and my knight. My first instinct was not, okay, let me just move my rook and give him my knight. I'm like, nah, offense is the best defense. What are the checks in this position? And that's how I found the move rook to a7 check. Well, if rook a8 check, if the king goes here, that's a rook. So if he takes my rook, I take the bishop, I'm winning. If the king goes here, however, what do I do? What do I do? I take his rook, his king takes, I give a check here. Oh, but then he has king here. And then I play rook to b8 and protect my knight, and then I'm not losing any material. Let's play rook to a8. So sometimes in chess, you're faced with some difficulties. It doesn't necessarily mean you're losing. Now, before we take here, am I able to give a check here first? The answer is no, because then I'm just helping him to develop. So let's just take the rook. And then once the king takes, I check on f8. And he needs to play king to e7 so that way my knight and my rook is under attack. Now I play rook to b8, guarding my knight. And I think the best he has is taking. Like, even though he's down by 4 points, he needs to take. Otherwise, I'm able to just leave my rook on the background and his knight will never ever be developed because if he moves the knight, he loses the rook. Yes, he's attacking my pawn, well, my knight, let's just move it, hit the bishop. Bishop has to move. I may finally complete my development after 22 moves. Moves the bishop. Let me simply complete my development. And I'm just ahead by so much points here. I'm also ahead by this knight and this rook because technically they're not playing. If the opponent has pieces that are not playing, you are ahead by those pieces. So he moves the pawn. Let's just centralize the knight. I want to get as much pieces in the game as possible. We're also in the end game, so I'm thinking of like finding ways to turn these three pawns versus this one pawn into two pass pawns. This is called a pawn majority, by the way. You guys should know this. He moves his king, which means he's trying to move his rook. You see how much he has to go through just to activate his pieces? While I'm just going to continue with my plan. Actually, there's a trap here. I'm going to go bishop to c5. I think he wants to play rook h7 so that way he's able to play knight f6. But if he plays rook h7, then his rook no longer guards the knight. And, well, he didn't go for that, but knight d6 would have won the knight. He chose to move the king. I think he's trying to go king here and develop the knight. I don't mind if he trades those, so let's just go here, hitting the pawn. He moves the king. I'm still not going to take because it will allow his development and I'd love to trade the rooks off the board. So let's play b4 here. I want him to move the knight. That's good. Before I take the rook, let's just take on f6 with check. And then once he takes, I just need to take the rook. I mean, there's a check there, but it doesn't do anything. Let's just take the rook and from here, it's just completely winning. All I'm going to be doing from here, guys, is just advancing my connected pass pawns. So he moves the bishop. Let's go knight d6, hit the bishop. And what do we know about pass pawns? In the end game, pass pawns must be pushed. So c4, b4 is coming next, unless he plays this move. He didn't. b4, and from here, I'm just going to be pushing my pass pawn up the board. He's not able to do this because I'm just going to take the pawn. So the whole time, I'm just going to be pushing my pawns up the board. He pushes the pawn anyways. Let's just take. Moves the bishop, but pass pawns must be pushed. He moves the king, pass pawns must be pushed. Moves the king, push the pass pawn. Hit the knight, I don't care. Queen the pass pawn. And then from here, we're just going to create another queen and win the game. So let's push. Queen, that's a check. And now we're just going to be going for checkmates. Usually when you have two queens or just a lot of pieces around the opponent's king, you always want to ensure that you give a check. So let's give a check here. He moves, and that's a checkmate. Let's keep climbing. Okay, we're playing against our first 700 rated player. He plays e4. Let's just play e5 in this position. Probably I should have played Scandinavian, but then he plays d4. Let's just take the pawn. Like, if I'm able to pull out his queen, I'm always going to be pulling out the queen and then develop my knight and gain a tempo on the queen. Now he has to move the queen out the way. And once the queen moves, I continue to develop and I'm playing with the black pieces and it looks as if I'm already leading in development. He develops his knight. Let's go bishop to b4 here, pinning his knight, which means the knight's not actually guarding the pawn. He goes bishop to d2. Now, if I takes bishop takes, he's going to take this pawn. So let me just get my king out the center of the board. And because my king is out the center and his king is in the center, we know the drill. I'm not even going to say it because I want you guys to know it. So he plays a3, attacking my bishop. I was planning on doing the grandmaster trade anyways, because yes, I'm going to be giving up my bishop for a knight, because the knight was guarding e4. Now my knight takes e4. I'm already ahead by a pawn, hitting this bishop. My rook is going to be swing in the game, putting it on the same line as the king. I'm going to play pawn d5 and develop my last piece. So he decided to play bishop to c4. He's just trying to develop. I wanted to play d5 here, but he has two pieces covering the square, so that makes some sense. I do have an idea here that could win a pawn. If you guys are able to find it, then that would be very nice. Like I could sack my knight on f2, and then after the king takes, I simply check, king has to move, and then I simply take on c4. I'm also thinking of just playing immediate queen to c4, threatening a checkmate on f2, and if pawn to g3 trying to prevent the checkmate, I still take on g3. So he plays g3. I want you guys to notice how it exposed this diagonal pointing towards his rook, and his king is in the center of the board. So I'm actually going to play the move knight takes g3, and I don't even want this unprotected bishop anymore. If he takes with the pawn, I grab the rook, I'm winning. If he takes with this pawn, I don't take the bishop. I stop here. This is called a fork. I'm attacking two pieces at the same time, checking the king, hitting the rook. He has to block the check or move the king, and then I'll grab the rook, and then I'm winning the game. He moves the king out the way. Let's just grab the rook here, and all I need to do is finish my development. I haven't moved any of my rooks. My bishop is still locked in, so if I could just move my pawn, develop my bishop, that would be great. Okay, queen to g4. That's a nice move. He's actively threatening a checkmate, so I have to play pawn to g6, and I'm heavily weakening the dark squares around my king. Luckily, he's not able to play queen here due to my knight, but I'm sure his plan is going to be, how can I get a queen on this g7 square? He moves his rook to d1. That's a blunder. This is called a discovered attack, by the way. My bishop is on the same line as the queen. So, and I want to develop my bishop anyways. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move my pawn to d5. My pawn attacks the bishop, and my bishop attacks the queen. Now, maybe he thinks he's able to take on d5 and counterattack my queen, but his queen is unprotected, and that's what he did. His queen is unprotected, and his rook is also on a light square. So I'm going to allow him to take my queen and just take his queen. Because the moment he takes my queen, which he has to do, I'll simply take his rook, and that's more material for me. So he took my queen, we take his rook. Now I'm ahead by 8 points. And then he started to trade. He's now trading. Let's just take back. I'm going to get my rooks in the game. He moves his knight to a3. Let's just get the rook in the game. One rook is on this file. The other rook is going to be coming on this file. And then I'm going to be setting up my checkmate. So he moves his knight to f2. Let's put the bishop here. I'm basically trying to trap his king on the background. I'm trying to get my other rook in the game so that way I could start like a checkmating attack. But because he goes here, I'm just going to give a check. And once the king moves, I'm going to trade because I'm ahead by so many material. I don't want any headaches to win, and I don't want to accidentally make any mistakes. So now this is completely over. He moves the king, scrap the pawn, and then he resigns. Let's keep going. Okay, here's the game that's going to take us to 700. I played e4, so now we're going to be playing d4. The opponent plays c6, and if I play e4, it transposed into a Karakan. But let's just play pawn to c4. And then if he plays pawn to d5, it's a regular Slav defense. Oh, I notice I haven't told you guys to like or subscribe, but that's all I'm asking for, for giving you guys a video like this. He plays pawn to d5, and now I'm just going to develop my knight. Like from here, it's just development actually. We're actually not afraid of a move like pawn takes c4. Whenever they do something like this though, they want to play pawn to b5 and hold on to their pawn. But I'm just going to play pawn to e3 here, and I'm just going to take the pawn on the next move. Now, pawn to e3 blocks the bishop in. Eventually, I'm going to play pawn to e4, and I didn't immediately play pawn to e4 because of b5. I wanted to sack, play queen to f3, and win his rook. Now, after e6, let's just take back our pawn. From here, it's just going to be the most normal development. He plays c5. Let's just develop our knight. I'm going to castle my king. He took, and notice how him taking allows me to take, and then my bishop is still going to get good development. He develops his knight, applying some pressure to my isolated pawn. But let me just castle my king. We know the drill. My king is out the center. His king is in the center. We're gonna play d5 and open the center. Okay, bishop to d6 was played. That's fine. Let's hit him with d5. It's a pawn break. And then after he takes, I could immediately check. But let's just play knight takes d5 first because, I mean, he was planning on playing knight e7 or bishop e6 anyways. So it's not like the check is a very strong move. He plays bishop to e6, and I'm thinking of rook to e1 to simply pin the bishop. But I really like the idea of knight to g5 because bishops are better than knights, and I want to ensure that I get rid of his bishop. And if he moves away his bishop, or this is a bad, like, don't do this. Like this, I do not know how open the position can be, but this is like the most open position. There's no traffic in the center of the board. Now I'm going to play queen takes d5. I have already three pieces on his f7 pawn. He has zero well, he has his king guarding the f7 pawn. But even if he tries to guard the pawn, I'm still going to take because he has one and I have three, which is why he plays knight to h6. Now, the question is, do I check his king first or do I just take? Let's just take on f7 in this position. And if his knight takes, my queen is going to take, and that's just a checkmate.